Welcome to Canadian History with Stephen Wilson. I'm your host, and in this special series, we're marching back to 1775 to uncover the dramatic story of the American invasion of Quebec, a failed campaign that could have created a 14th colony, but instead cemented the foundation of two nations. In 2015, the musical Hamilton took the world by storm. It gave us a fresh look at one of America's key founding figures, telling the dramatic story of Alexander Hamilton's rise and tragic fall. But what if I told you that Hamilton's life, and the lives of his rival, Aaron Burr, and his father-in-law, Philip Schuyler, could have been completely different? Their fates and the future of the revolution itself were directly tied to one of the earliest, most ambitious and ultimately disastrous decisions made by the Continental Army, the invasion of Quebec. Now, we don't often think about Canada when we talk about the American Revolution, but the Americans were fixated on it. They saw their northern neighbors in Quebec as a people who should naturally join their cause. At the same time, the unique way the British Crown treated Quebec was one of the very things that pushed the American colonists towards war in the first place. The Americans weren't going to throw away their shot to bring Canada into the fold. But what led the Continental Congress to make such a bold move and order an invasion? So, how did we get here? While the first shots of the Revolutionary War were fired in April 1775, the powder keg had been filling for years. At its heart was a simple, powerful idea. The Americans wanted representation. They were being taxed by a government an ocean away and had absolutely no say in the matter. Things really started to escalate in 1773 with the Tea Act. Now, this act actually made tea cheaper for the colonists by allowing the British East India Company to sell it directly, tax-free in America. But there was a catch. It still carried the tax from the old Townshend Acts, which groups like the Sons of Liberty saw as a violation of their rights. It wasn't about the money. It was about the principle. When the Dartmouth sailed into Boston Harbor in November 1773, thousands gathered to figure out what to do. They passed a resolution: send the ship back and don't pay the tax. But the governor of Massachusetts refused to let the ship leave. So on the night of December 16th, things came to a head. About 100 men disguised as Mohawk warriors boarded the Dartmouth and two other ships. They proceeded to dump 342 chests of tea into the harbor. That was over 90,000 pounds of tea, worth what would be about $1.7 million today, all thrown into the sea. Britain's reaction was swift and furious. In 1774, Parliament passed a series of laws the colonists called the Intolerable Acts. In Britain, they were called the Coercive Acts, and they were designed to punish Massachusetts. They shut down Boston's port, stripped away many of the colony's rights, and essentially placed it under military control. The British Prime Minister, Lord North, didn't mince words. He said, and I'm paraphrasing here, "The Americans have defied us, attacked our merchants, and burned our ships. We've been patient, but now we must risk something, or all is over." But it was a fifth act passed alongside the others that lit a fire under all the colonies and connects directly to our story: the Quebec Act. You see, Britain had gained control of Quebec after the 7 Years' War, and it was a territory full of French-speaking Catholics, a population the British feared was primed to rebel. To keep them loyal, the Quebec Act did three things that outraged the American colonists. First, it expanded Quebec's territory deep into what is now the American Midwest. Second, it guaranteed the free practice of Catholicism. And third, it restored French civil law and the old seigneurial system of land management. To the Protestant, land-hungry American colonies, this felt like a direct threat. They saw it as the Crown creating a massive Catholic, French-speaking rival at their backs. In response, delegates from 12 of the 13 colonies met in Philadelphia for the First Continental Congress in September 1774. They drafted a petition to the king and threatened to boycott British goods if the Intolerable Acts weren't repealed. But they also did something else. They wrote a letter directly to the people of Quebec. In this letter, sent in October 1774, they laid out all the rights the Quebec Act was denying them, rights they considered essential for any free people. Rights like having a say in your own government, trial by jury, and freedom of the press. They ended with a powerful plea, stating, "These are the rights a profligate ministry are now striving by force of arms to ravish from us, and which we are, with one mind, resolved to never resign, but with our lives." They then invited Quebec to send delegates to the next Congress. So what was the reaction in Quebec? Well, it was mixed. The governor, Guy Carleton, tried to stop the letter from circulating. While many French-speaking inhabitants were neutral or even happy with British rule, others were intrigued. An American agent sent to scout the area, a man named John Brown, found that the province was only weakly defended. And with that intelligence, the idea of an invasion began to look less like a risk and more like an opportunity. The political maneuvering and letter-writing campaigns could only last so long. On April 19, 1775, the conflict turned bloody with the Battle of Lexington, and the war was on. Less than a month later, on May 10th, the Americans made a stunningly bold move. A rowdy militia known as the Green Mountain Boys, led by the larger-than-life Ethan Allen, teamed up with the ambitious Colonel Benedict Arnold. Under the cover of darkness, they stormed the British-held Fort Ticonderoga on Lake Champlain, catching the garrison completely by surprise. Legend has it that Allen demanded the fort surrender in the name of the Great Jehovah and the Continental Congress. Whether he actually said that is debated by historians, but it captures the sheer audacity of the moment. With Ticonderoga and the nearby Fort Crown Point in their hands, the Americans now controlled a crucial waterway, a virtual highway leading directly to Quebec. The victory immediately sparked a new idea in the minds of two rival commanders. Both Arnold and Allen, intensely competitive and eager for glory, independently began pushing for an invasion of Canada. They argued that a force of just 1,500 men could likely drive the British out of Quebec, and more importantly, convince the province to join the revolution. Initially, the Continental Congress was hesitant. Their first order was actually to abandon the newly captured forts, but a wave of protest from New England, combined with alarming news from the north, forced them to reconsider. The news was that Quebec's governor, General Guy Carleton, wasn't sitting still. He was preparing for an American attack by reinforcing Fort St. John, often called Fort St. John's, on the Richelieu River. Carleton was a respected and capable Irish-born soldier who knew the region well, but he faced an uphill battle. When he tried to raise a local militia to defend the province, the response was lukewarm at best. Both sides began a frantic campaign to win over the powerful indigenous nations of the region, especially the Haudenosaunee, also known as the Iroquois Confederacy. British agents met with Mohawk, Huron, and other leaders, securing promises to keep supply lines open and harass the Americans. The Americans, meanwhile, sent their own missionaries and agents, urging neutrality and framing the conflict as a family affair between Britain and its colonies. Faced with evidence of a British military buildup and indigenous alliances, Congress changed its mind. They authorized a proactive approach, an invasion. The man they chose to lead it was General Philip Schuyler. And here's where our story reconnects directly with Alexander Hamilton. Philip Schuyler was a wealthy and respected New Yorker who had served as a captain in the British forces during the 7 Years' War, fighting in key battles. After the war, he became a successful businessman and a colonel in the New York militia. He was also a family man. His second daughter, born in 1757, was a bright and spirited young woman named Elizabeth Schuyler, or Eliza. A few years later, she would marry Alexander Hamilton, forever linking his story to the events unfolding on the Canadian border. But while Schuyler was organizing the main invasion force, a furious Benedict Arnold felt he was being overlooked. After all, invading Canada was partly his idea. Never one to be sidelined, Arnold rode to Cambridge, Massachusetts, and went straight to the top, the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army, George Washington. he pitched a daring second invasion, a supporting force that he would personally lead on a treacherous, secret route through the wilderness of Maine to attack Quebec City directly. And so the stage was set. As the summer of 1775 drew to a close, two American armies prepared to march north. The first American offensive of the war was about to begin, an invasion that would set in motion a chain of events that guaranteed two very different nations would emerge on the North American continent.